In 2018, Netflix introduced their latest effort in the teen drama scene, Elite, a murder mystery show that would focus on the life of the children who attended the elite school Las Encinas. The show was an immediate hit with the viewers, and it became one of the most popular shows of the year, getting praise from critics and audience alike for its story, its writing, its acting, and more. However, as time went on and more seasons were released, the show slowly but surely started to lose its shine, and the acclaim that once defined it. In this video, we will be taking a look at the past 8 seasons of Elite to try and find out when and why did the show went off the rails.
Now that's what I'm talking about.
Season 1 is a traditional whodunit mystery. It starts after a public school falls apart due to bad construction, and in order to make up for it, the construction company decides to give 3 scholarships away to the private school, Las Encimas. The recipients of these scholarships are Nadia, Christian, and Samuel, and throughout the season, we get to see how their lives are affected by being trusted into this new life and their interaction with the other students at this school. Nadia sees this opportunity as a way to get ahead, as she's very studious and has a lot of dreams that she thinks being in the school will help her achieve. She's especially motivated after learning that if she gets the best grades in her class, she can win a scholarship to a very important school in Florida. This gets her caught up in a feud with 2 students at the school. First, we have Lou, who is a racist Islamophobe, but also the other straight-A student in the school. She decides to bribe their teacher to make sure that she will get the scholarship and convinces her boyfriend Guzman to seduce Nadia so that they can film her and humiliate her.
Oh, that's no. In the sense that, no. You know what I mean?
Meanwhile, Christian also sees this as an opportunity to get ahead, but not academically, just socially. He knows that if he gets the right connections, he can one day become someone of importance without doing much work. Enter Carla and Polo. These two have been together for forever, but something is missing in their relationship. Polo decides that something is a third, so he convinces Carla to have sex with Christian while he watches, and eventually they end up becoming a throuple until Polo and Christian have sex without Carla. Lastly, we have Samuel. He has a really troublesome life at home, not having a father, and his brother Nano just recently having gotten out of prison, so he mostly just wants to lay low. However, he cannot help but be smitten by Marina, who does like him but is much more interested in his brother. We also have Ander and Omar. Ander is a student at Las Encinas, and he ends up meeting Omar, who is also Nadia's brother, after he buys some weed from him. He ends up finding out that he's the guy that he's been talking through dating apps, and while at first they're both not sure about their relationship, given that they're both closeted and don't seem to be in the position to come out anytime soon, they still decide to start a relationship. All of these storylines develop in ways that will eventually lead to discovering the big mystery, which is who killed Marina. Marina herself is a very messy person. I mean, she is a teenager after all. And after making a lot of selfish decisions, she ends up making an enemy out of everyone. So every person mentioned before has a big or small reason to want her dead. Starting with her own brother Guzman, he is a very temperamental person who has a history of violence. 2 years prior to the events of this season, Guzman and his friends beat up a student called Pablo who had dated Marina and infected her with HIV. The beating was so bad that his parents ended up paying Pablo off so that he wouldn't go and press charges. The whole thing was deleted from the school records, and scholarships were temporarily stopped to try and prevent this from happening again. Since then, he has become fiercely overprotective of Marina and tends to rage anytime that she does something he doesn't like. Basically, every other scene of his is him trying to fight someone. So the police thinks that maybe in a moment of rage over her misbehaving, he might have killed her. Then we have Lou. As I mentioned before, Lou bribes her teacher in order to get the scholarship over Nadia. Marina ends up finding out after Carla tells her, and at first she uses this information to get her teacher not to snitch on her when she gets caught with weed at the school, but she ends up telling Nadia about it, so the principal ends up finding out and Lou gets suspended. We also have Nadia, Omar, and Ander. As I mentioned, Nadia is Omar's sister and Ander is eventually his boyfriend. Omar also happens to be their local drug dealer, and he sells to Marina. She eventually gets caught and snitches on him, which leads to the principal of the school talking to Nadia's parents. This ends up making his parents, who were already mad about Nadia lying to them about certain things, get pissed off, and they decide to arrange a marriage for Omar. Ander tries to convince Marina to tell the principal, who is his mom, that Omar didn't sell to her, but she refuses. And after finding out about all of this, Nadia sends her a message telling her that she ruined her and Omar's life, and this is when she tells her about the bribing. Now let's talk about Samu and Nano. As I mentioned, they're in the middle of a love triangle. Samuel is like obsessed with Marina, and she claims to have feelings for him, but she ends up sleeping with Nano multiple times, even after she finds out that he was trying to extort her family. In fact, she actually helps him do it. Now, during one of these times that she has sex with Nano, she ends up getting pregnant, and while at first she decides to get an abortion, he ends up convincing her to run away with him and the baby. Samu ends up finding out that Nano is the father of the baby and tells Nano that he's dead to him, but despite his anger, he still cares about Marina, so he tries to convince her to stay multiple times, and even goes to Guzman directly to try and get him to convince her. And while it seems like she doesn't want to hear it, she does end up writing a text to Nano telling him that she doesn't want to leave after talking with Samu, but she never gets to send it because she gets killed. Lastly, we have Polo, Christian, and Carla. This power throuple is actually pretty divorced from the main plot for the majority of the season and rarely, if ever, interact with Marina. That is until Marina decides to help Nano pay off his debt by having him steal a bunch of watches that hers and Carla's dad own and that were being kept at Carla's house. In order to do this, she decides to befriend Carla again as they had drifted apart with age so that she can steal the keys to the house and figure out where the watches are so that Nano can steal them. The plan works out perfectly until Marina overhears Carla say that one of the watches has the documents that prove their dad's shady business. So she tells Nano not to sell that one watch. However, instead of giving it back, Nano decides to bribe their parents in order to get even more money. Originally, Carla's dad doesn't want to pay, but when he gives in, instead of agreeing, Nano just asks for more and more and more money. So Carla tells Marina to tell him to give back the watch because if they get exposed, her family will suffer the most. So she tries to steal the watch, but Nano just gives it to her and tells her to let him get the money before she gives it back. After finding out that Marina is going to run away, Carla figures that Marina is keeping the watch in the school, so she asks Christian to get into her locker and steal her bag, under the lie that it was Polo's locker and that he had some photos of her that she was afraid he would leak. Because at this time, Polo is no longer a part of this relationship anymore, since he decided to have sex with Christian without her. Christian doesn't steal the bag because he's tired of Carla using him, and that's pretty much the end of that. So, who did it? Who killed Marina? If you guessed Polo, then you would be correct. His reason is simply getting Carla back. You see, Polo is not as powerful as one might think he is. He's easily manipulated, low-key gets bullied by all his friends, and has a tough relationship with his parents as they don't think that he has enough aspiration and is not a leader. They also think that he's not manly enough, which is funny because he has lesbian moms. You would think that they would be a little bit more open about gender expectations, but not at all. The guy slowly descends into madness, and after finding out how badly Carla wants the watch back, he decides to go and get it for her. Originally, he didn't go in there with the intention of killing Marina, he just wanted the watch back. However, Marina, seeing him as someone who is pathetic and small, just like everyone else does, starts to insult him and tells him that Carla is just using him, that it's pathetic that he lets her treat him like that, and already on his last leg, Polo takes the trophy and hits her in the head with it. This season was great. It wasn't perfect because at the end of the day, it's a Netflix show about rich teenagers doing drugs, having sex, and getting away with murder, but it was still good enough, and I like it now just as much as I liked it when I first watched it in 2018. One of my favorite parts of the show is the usage of flash forwards, which sadly are never used as good ever again. Most of the episodes start or have a scene at some point in which in the present, one of the characters is being questioned by the police. And normally they will have a character be questioned and then immediately show Marina doing something that would make them want her dead, which really adds to the idea that anyone can be the killer and they're all seriously capable of doing this. I also really love Marina as a character. If you like any of the characters, you're bound to hate her because she fucks everyone over and is super messy, but that's exactly why I like her. I really like that she's not this angelic, perfect victim that never did anything wrong and someone just went crazy and killed her for no reason. Not that anything she did warrants what happened to her, but you know what I mean. Regardless of all of her mistakes and bad decisions, she didn't deserve what happened to her, and I like that the show didn't portray her as a perfect victim in order to show that she didn't deserve it, nor use her bad deeds as a way to excuse her murder. Now let's talk about Guzman, Lou, and Nadia. As I mentioned before, this whole thing came to be because Lou was mad at Nadia for being academically competitive with her, and Guzman was mad that she threatened to tell the principal that she caught them having sex. I'm going to be honest, the only character I really liked from this trifecta is Nadia. Guzman really sucks. His hatred for poor people literally comes out of the fact that a poor person infected Marina. That's it. And so now for eternity, he hates poor people. Nadia is just an exception. It's not like he changes his mind as time goes on. No, he just thinks that she's one of the good ones. But he still demonizes every other poor character on the show, including Nadia's own family. He never grows or changes or even seems like he's on that path. His only reaction to anything is rage, and that gets old really fast. I think it would have been interesting to see him move forward a more accepting mindset, and that be destroyed by Marina's death. Lou also sucks. Again, not only is she racist, Islamophobic, and classist the second everybody walks in, but she literally came up with the idea to film and then distribute revenge porn. So there's nothing good to say about her. The character is charismatic, so I'll give her that, and she does work really well as a mean girl because Dana Paola is a really good mean girl actress, but Lou as a person sucks. She's terrible. The most interesting one, as I said, is Nadia. We do see her change and grow as she's originally very judgmental of everything, but she does eventually changes her mind and realizes that maybe the way her dad and her religion do things isn't necessarily the right way. It's also nice to see a Muslim woman who is not forced to wear a hijab and doesn't feel oppressed by it. Now, this is not gonna last, but it was nice to see. Speaking of Muslim, let's talk about Omar and Ander. Something that I really liked about this storyline is that they both struggle with the sexuality and coming out to their parents, and they didn't just make this the repressive Muslim boy that is helped to come out by the liberal and free Western guy. It is true that Ander's parents are way more accepting than Omar's, but they're still uncomfortable by it. In their own ways, they're still struggling with it. I really don't have anything to say about Nano or Samu. I don't really care that much about them outside of the love triangle context. Nano is a weirdo for being 25 and getting into a relationship with a 15-year-old girl that is dating his brother, while Samuel legitimately doesn't have anything going on other than his obsession with Marina. So there's really nothing to say about them as individuals, but I really did enjoy their overall storyline. Lastly, I want to talk about sex on the show because this will be one of my most recurrent complaints as the show goes on, and I just want to make it known that it's not because I'm a prude who hates sex, it's just because it gets terrible as we move forward. But I think the sex on this season is actually great. Every sexual encounter in this season has a reason to be and helps move the story forward in some way, either by literally moving the story ahead, like Marina and Nano having sex and getting pregnant, or helping develop the characters, like when we learned that Samu lost his virginity to Marina. Meanwhile, the people who have the most sex are Carla, Christian, and Polo, and I don't know if this was the intention of the writers, but to me it makes perfect sense that the couple that is the most fucked up is the one that has the most sex. Think about it. The only thing that these three people have in common is their sexual desire for one another. And they use said desire to manipulate each other. They just use sex as a tool of manipulation and always see it as a way to get what they want, whether it be the sex itself or something else. Not as a way to further bond and create intimacy with one another, which unfortunately will not continue to be the case on this show. But we will talk about that later on.
I mean, it's alright,
Despite the fact that season 2 is widely considered to be part of the golden age of the show, I personally feel like there is a noticeable downgrade. The show seems much less tight as far as the story goes, the mystery is not nearly as interesting, and there are multiple storylines that seem like they were thrown together at the very last second in order to tie them to the mystery. The season starts after summer break is over, with Christian finally visiting Nano in jail after spending the summer traveling with Carla and her family. Christian is being eaten alive by his conscience. Not only is he helping cover up a murder, but he also helped put his best friend in jail. After talking to Nano, he starts to consider going to the police, not feeling that it's fair that he gets to live the high life while his friend goes to jail for 20 years for a crime he didn't commit. Carla obviously is worried about this and tells her dad that he's going to be talking. Thankfully for her, when Christian is on his way to the police station, he gets run over by a car, a hit orchestrated by her father. In this accident, he hurts his leg really bad and is possibly going to lose them, so her dad offers to send him to Switzerland so that he can be treated. After this, Samuel gets the idea that Carla and her dad have something to do not just with this accident but with Marina's death, so he decides to get close to her and seduce her in order to get information. He doesn't really have much of a plan, to be honest. He just straight up asks her multiple times if she has anything to do with it, and she obviously lies and says no, and that's about it. They almost immediately start to have sex and just as fast fall in love. So Samuel quickly goes from wanting to find her guilty to wanting to find her innocent. Meanwhile, Polo starts to abuse his anxiety medication after Christian's accident, and in a moment of vulnerability confesses to Ander that he killed Marina. So Ander tells him that he has 24 hours to tell Guzman or he will. He tries to tell him but can't bring himself to do it, and then ends up trying to commit suicide. After this, Ander tells him that he believes that he didn't mean to kill Marina and that the least he could do is give Samu the money that he needs to pay for Nano's bail. While this is all happening, Samu starts to work for the mom of his new classmate Rebecca, who is a drug dealer, so that he can get the money to pay for Nano's bail. When he gets the package with the money, he assumes that it's from his job, but quickly finds out that it isn't. At first, Carla lies and says that she sent it, but he notices that she's lying and assumes that whoever sent the money is the person who killed Marina. He starts to look through some photos of the night of the murder and finds out that Polo changed his shirt and put on Christians halfway through the party, so he figures that he's the killer. He goes to talk to Carla about it and records what he considers to be a confession, but when he shows it to the police, they let him know that that is not enough proof, so he should just try to move on. On top of this, some people related to his drug job have been trying to find him, and they go to his house, so he decides to run away, and they follow him into the woods, and that's when he went missing. This is the mystery of the season. Who is responsible for the disappearance of Samuel? We learned that when Samu told Guzman about Polo being the killer, he didn't believe him at first, of course, but after Ander denies it to him, he texts him and tells him that he does believe him. When Samu runs away, he coincidentally ends up at his grandparents' house, so they come up with a plan to pretend that he's missing and possibly dead, so that Carla gets worried and talks. Carla freaks out now that he's missing because she's in love with him, so she decides to come clean, and both her and Polo get arrested. 2 weeks later, Guzman and Samu finally make up and everybody's back to school. They think everything is back to normal until Polo shows up to the school because the police couldn't find the murder weapon, and until they get it, they cannot keep him in jail. I'm going to be honest, guys, I accidentally spoiled the end for myself, so I already knew that Samu was alive the entire time, but I didn't really know how or who was involved in the mystery. And even with that, I can say that I was not all that excited or interested to find out what happened with him and why. And I think the reason why I felt this way is because I just don't care for Samuel or Carla that much this season. Samuel was never that interested of a character. His whole shtick last season was that he was obsessed with Marina and really nothing more. His storyline was interesting last season thanks to Marina and Nano, but he doesn't have them to fall on this time, and Carla is not much help. I don't know if it's the writing or the acting, but Carla only has 2 modes: crying because she's about to get caught, or stone cold while lying so that she doesn't get caught. Nothing more, nothing less. I also don't really buy their romance. They fall in love, and I don't know why. The only thing they do is talk about whether or not she killed Marina, and then immediately after have sex. It would make more sense if Carla was using sex to manipulate him like she did Polo and Christian, but she seems to be earnestly in love with him. The same thing goes for him. Maybe the sex is just that good, but the characters act towards each other in the exact same way before, during, and after they claim to be in love. Another thing is that the show does nothing to make me like Carla or think that she's a better person now. I think they were banking on people liking Samuel and transferring that goodwill onto her, but they didn't actually do anything to make me feel sorry for her. She's not remorseful at all about what she did, she just doesn't want to get caught. Even when she tells Polo to come clean, she tells him to not expose her as a favor for covering for him and tries to use sex to manipulate him. She never says she's sorry or that she regrets it or that she wishes they had spoken up sooner. So the entire season I'm sitting here thinking, why exactly should I feel sorry for her? Yeah, she didn't kill Marina, but she covered it up. She came up with a plan, she told Polo what to say, she told Christian what to do, and then continued to manipulate them both for months to keep them quiet, and never showed an ounce of remorse for any of it. So why should I be rooting for her? Another issue that I have is regarding the mystery itself. In the last season, the reason why it was so good is because everyone had a reason to want to kill Marina, and all the roads led to her. None of this exists with Samuel because he's just a good boy. So the only people who could have disappeared him are Guzman and Carla. No one else. But because this doesn't really make that great of a mystery, they end up deciding to tie a bunch of stories that didn't really have much to do with anything in order to make things more interesting. But they didn't, because I didn't believe for a second that these people had anything to do with it. Firstly, with the drug thing. That literally comes out of nowhere so that they can add Omar to the storyline, because so far he has nothing to do with anything. He barely even talks to Samuel the entire season. So they have him be the one who finds out that these people are looking for Samuel and then tell Samuel about it. This also adds Rebecca and her mom to the mystery, but again, it doesn't work because I don't believe for a second that they had anything to do with it or that those stock characters that went after him were responsible either. Also, this storyline is never brought up again. We never find out who these people were or why they were following Samuel. We know that it had something to do with Rebecca's mom, but we don't know anything beyond that, and they do not show up next season. Then they try to add Lou to the story by having Samuel catch her doing something she wasn't supposed to be doing, and believing that he started to tell other people, so she tells him that she's going to kill him. But again, not for a second did I believe that she did that, so it doesn't really work. Now let's talk about the rest of the storylines that I didn't mention while I was breaking down the season. Let's start with Rebecca. Rebecca is a new student, obviously, and her whole thing is that her mom's a drug dealer, but they're lying and saying that they won the lottery. And since she's new money and isn't, I guess, as classy and proper as the other girls, she's shunned by them and ends up being friends with Samuel and Nadia. She develops a crush on Samuel, but doesn't act on it and just accepts that he's into girls like Carla and Marina and not girls like her. I really would like to have more to say about her. I thought she was going to be a really interesting character, but she really isn't. She does look cool, so I guess she does have that. Then we have Christian and Nano. They were both barely on the show because the actors were filming Money Heist at the time. So sadly, we only get Christian in the first episode, and Nano has like 5 or 6 short scenes. As far as Christian goes, I think it's a shame that we didn't get to see him more. I think it would have been very interesting to see him interact with Polo specifically, since they already didn't have a good relationship from before the murder, and see if or how they would have kept him quiet. But I do think the writers did the best that they could with what they had, and his send-off was nicely done and it made sense. Meanwhile, as I said, Nano is only in a few scenes, and I'm glad he didn't play a big part in this season. He would have just made things significantly worse, not only for himself, but also for Samu, and I don't think that without Marina, he has anything to add to the show. Then we have Omar and Ander. They keep dating in secret after last season until Omar's dad gets sick and he breaks up with Ander because he's never gonna be able to be free. Also, Ander cheats on him with none other than Polo.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Eventually, they make up again, and after having a huge fight with his dad, Omar is kicked out of the house and moves in with Ander and his mom. This is at the same time that Ander finds out about Polo being the murderer, so the relationship is not in a very good place because he's in another world, and things only get worse because now that he's free to be who he really are, Ander realizes that Omar is much more gay than he originally thought, and he does not like it. So Omar gets a job at a club in order to make money to be able to move out of his house, but after everything is uncovered, they decide to stay together. The only interesting part of this storyline is Omar. His decision to finally stand up to his dad and him finally being able to be who he always wanted to be were definitely the most enjoyable parts. But Ander is just coasting on his goodwill because he doesn't have anything. His only struggle in the previous season were him being in the closet and wanting to quit tennis, but those things are gone now, so nothing really happens with him. His parents are getting a divorce, but we barely see or hear about that or how it's affecting him. Now let's talk about the love square between Guzman, Nadia, Lou, and her brother Valerio. Yeah, you heard that correctly. I said brother. Ew! After everything that happened with Marina, Guzman and Lou spent the summer at his grandparents' house, away from everyone. During that time, her brother Valerio came back from his boarding school, and Guzman didn't talk to Nadia because he promised her dad that he was going to stay away from her. Nadia and Guzman end up having sex, so he decides to break up with Lou, but Nadia tells him that they can't be together. Lou then goes and tells Nadia that if she doesn't want her parents to find out that she's not a virgin anymore, she has to fail all of her tests so that she loses her scholarship. She tells Valerio about this, and he tells her that the next time Lou threatens her, he should bring up the Valerio thing. Nadia ends up apologizes to Guzman, and they end up having sex in the school, which Valerio films and sends to Lou without knowing that she was going to post it online.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
At the end, Valerio and Lou get caught by her dad while he's masturbating her under their table while having dinner. And Nadia and Guzman end up kind of in the air because they never get to talk about the video or what happened. Much like with Omar and Ander, I think Nadia is by far the best part of the storyline. Personally, I really don't care about the whole Valerio and Lou thing. I'm not into incest, and I'm not going to root for them no matter what. I will say that I liked Valerio as a character. We find out that his parents have been playing ping pong with him because neither of them wants to deal with his issues, and then he took up drugs after everything that happened with Lou the first time around. But given how this storyline ends and develops, I really don't care much about it. I'm still not a fan of Lou, though I understand more why she's so obsessed with being this perfect person and why she's so attached to Guzman and wants to be with him so badly. But sharing revenge porn isn't gonna make me like you. Now, Guzman's storyline was interesting. It was interesting to see him go from being so strongly against drugs to the point that he wanted to fight Omar in season 1 for giving Ander weed, to it being the only thing that he can use to cope with the loss of his sister. But I didn't like how quickly they dropped it. I think the story would have been more interesting if he had developed a more serious issue and things just got progressively more out of control. He has more than enough reasons to progressively get worse, but instead they kind of just dropped it, and the power of Nadia's love is enough to make him feel better. As far as Nadia goes, I don't really love the way her taking off her hijab was framed. I'm not saying she can't change her mind, but it was an interesting choice to have her take off her hijab and immediately become this free, liberated person that behaves in the exact same way as everybody else and is immediately accepted by all of her classmates. She never seems to feel conflicted about it, especially in regards to the fact that she is lying to her parents because they don't know she doesn't wear the hijab outside of the house. From one second to the other, she's just over her religion and her culture, and she doesn't care anymore. And she does not stop for a second to think about the implications of that, or what does that mean for her life? What does that mean for her family? What does that mean for herself as a person? And now, onto my favorite character on the show, Cayetana. Cayetana is a new student who is seemingly just as wealthy and privileged as the rest of the students, but the truth is that she's there on a scholarship, her mom works at the school, and the mansion she supposedly lives in is one of the many that she helps her mom clean on the weekends. She really wants to be a part of this world as much as Christian in season 1 and uses this opportunity to get ahead. And the perfect chance comes along after she saves Polo when he tries to kill himself. Cayetana ends up telling him the truth, and at the same time they find out that her mom has lost all of her clients because Cayetana stole a dress to go to a party. So she asks Lou for help to set up a charity party that in reality is for her to get money to pay for all of their debts. But she ends up getting caught by Lou and she exposes her in front of everyone. She thinks she's gonna have to leave, but Polo gives her money to pay for all of her debt, for her to go to school the next year, and gets her mom her old job back. Polo ends up coming clean to her about the murder, and she decides to go and find the murder weapon and hide it. And that's why he's set free and is allowed to go back to school. Cayetana is by far the person with the most interesting storyline. I feel like they did a way better job with the class disparity topic that they did with Rebecca, mainly because she has more to do and more storyline. But it's interesting to see the lengths that she's willing to go to get ahead in a way similar to Christian, but at a much higher extreme. My favorite part about her is that I don't really know what her real intentions are. What is the truth behind her feelings for Polo? Did she get close to him because she actually liked him, or because she thought that he was vulnerable and easy to manipulate? Did she tell him the truth because she actually liked him, or because it was her last-ditch effort to have a better life? Did she hide the trophy because she liked him, or because she knows that without him she has nothing? Maybe it's all of the above, but I want to know more about this girl, and I think that she was by far the highlight of this season.
Nice.
Season 3 is the end of the golden age of this show. I'm not going to keep you guessing. This season focuses on trying to find out who killed Polo. After everything that happened at the end of the previous season, the court orders for him and Carla to have a sit-down in which they're going to tell their side of the story. Polo at this point has decided that he's going to tell the truth. However, before he can do it, Carla decides to change her story and say that she lied because she was mad at Polo and her dad. In order to reinstate him into the social fold, his mothers decide to sponsor a scholarship at the school, but this obviously isn't enough, and Guzman and Samu decide to open a fake Twitter account in which they post things as him admitting to killing Marina. Guzman also tricks him into thinking that he wants to be friends again, and once he has him in his house, he ties him and starts to beat him up until he confesses that he killed Marina. Because of this, Polo decides that he wants to leave Spain because he just can't stand the torture that he's being put through. However, he gets rejected from everywhere after someone starts a new account, keeps tweeting, and sends it to the school. That someone turns out to be Cayetana. Things seem pretty helpless for him until Valerio comes into the picture. He ended up getting kicked out and cut off by his dad last season and now doesn't really have anyone. So he goes up to Polo and Cayetana and tells them that he wants to be with them, so they start to date as a throuple. He tells them everything that happened with his family, including that Lou has also been cut off. So Polo tells her to stop being rude to them if she wants to win the scholarship that his moms are sponsoring. Polo, Cayetana, and Valerio are pretty good together, so they decide to try and convince his moms to pay for him to go to college with him. However, he doesn't seem super sure about it, so Valerio decides to start selling drugs with Rebecca in order to make money to go to college. Sadly, when Polo finds out, especially when he finds out that Valerio is selling to Carla, he basically breaks up with him. He also ends up breaking up with Cayetana because, much like with Carla, the relationship only worked because there was a third she liked more than him. At the same time that this is all happening, Nadia and Lou win the scholarship and they decide, for some reason, to go on stage and say that Polo killed Marina, so they end up losing the scholarship, obviously. That is, until Polo confesses to his mom and asks them to give it back. At this point, Polo is just over it and wants to turn himself in, so he asks Cayetana to give him the trophy so that he can give it to the police. He also apologizes to Guzman for killing Marina and tries to tell Lou that she will get the scholarship, but she throws a drink at him. He goes to get all cleaned up and Lou comes after him with a broken bottle, telling him that he hurt everyone. He, in a fashion similar to Marina, tells her that Guzman doesn't love her and is just using her, so she stabs him and he ends up falling from the club's balcony. Before the police arrives, all the kids get together and decide to lie and claim that Polo committed suicide. Lou realizes that there was a group of girls who saw her go into the bathroom but doesn't remember who, so they all decide to blame each other in order to throw the police off, and Cayetana and his moms end up telling the police that he did kill Marina. Now, let's briefly talk about Cayetana. I think she was amazing for the majority of the season. Her sabotaging Polo leaving, even though she knew how bad he was feeling, was so good. And the introduction of Valerio to the dynamic, mirroring that of season 1, was also good for the most part. But I do have 2 problems with the whole storyline. For one, Valerio. I don't really understand why he decided to get close to them. I obviously thought that he did it to get money off of Polo or to get a place to live with them, but he never asked for any of that. He says that he wants to join them because the 3 of them have been ostracized, but that is not true. Not for him anyways, because yeah, Lou doesn't want him around, but he's still friends with Rebecca, Nadia, Guzman, Ander, even Samu. So he's not in a similar position, at least not at the point when he decides to get close to them. Which is why I thought that he was just, sweet talking them to use them for money, but he never asks for anything. The most he asks for is for Polo to pay for his college, but he only asks once, and when he doesn't seem like he really wants to do it, he drops it and decides to find the money another way because he wants to seriously be with them. But I just don't understand where this desire comes from. The second thing I don't like about this storyline is Cayetana's ending. To me, it makes no sense that she would go along with protecting Lou. Lou has been bullying her since the moment she got to the school. She exposed her and then continued to bully her, so why would she protect her? I know that she likes Valerio and he was the one to convince her, but I just don't buy that she would go ahead with it. The other problem that I have is that at the end, Polo's moms offer to pay for her college, but she decides to turn them down and instead becomes a custodian at the school in order to make money. I know that obviously they didn't want her to go off to college because she would have had to leave the show, but I think they should have found another way to keep her around because this makes no sense. She just abandons her aspirations because Polo is dead now. Maybe the story they wanted to tell is that greed is bad and that her greed is in part what led to Polo's death because he wouldn't have been in Spain if not for her. But I don't think that point was really driven home at all, and her turning down the money just kind of seems like an out-of-character decision. Meanwhile, Carla is stuck in this terrible storyline where her dad is basically pimping her out to this guy called Jedi because they're broke. Jedi used to go to their school, but he was poor and fat, so no one liked him. But now that he's back, he's skinny and rich, and he wants to be with Carla. Carla is basically forced to date him in order to get him to invest money into her dad's company, and she ends up falling into drugs as a way to cope with it. This storyline sucks mainly because Jedi is not a character at all, and this will unfortunately become a recurring issue that this show has with its black characters. They bring them in, give them 0 personality, character, or anything to do, and that's it. They're just there for the entire season. Jedi could have been an interesting character if they had gone more into how the way he was treated then has affected the way he sees and treats the other rich kids now, but that doesn't happen. Also, I think the actor was miscasted. He looks way older than the rest of the kids, especially when he wears the uniform, and that took me out a few times. But overall, this storyline was a waste of time, which is sad because this is also Carla's last storyline as she leaves the show. Now, let's talk about Nadia. Nadia meets this guy called Malik, who seems to be the perfect guy that her parents would want her to be with, but it turns out that this is all a farce because he's secretly a party animal. Nadia doesn't care much at first because she can use this to cover for her when she goes out to parties, but she starts to have a problem with it when she finds out that he's gay and that he has been having something with Omar, of all people. She also ends up becoming friends with Lou after she finds out that she was cut off by her parents, so she decides to share her scholarship with her and they end up going to college together. I honestly wish that we had seen how far Nadia was willing to go with this pursuit of freedom and how crazy she would have gotten. And I don't mean getting married to Malik when he's gay. I mean having them be in a real relationship and have her be sucked into his secret life that seems to go much deeper than the secret life that she was having. The only thing that I didn't really like from her this season was her friendship with Lou. She literally ends her relationship with Guzman because of the video that almost ruined her life, and yet she's willing to forgive Lou just because now she has a hard time in her life. Mind you, Lou doesn't even apologize for anything. Not for all the racism, not for the original bet, and not for the leaking of the video. She just tells her a sub story, and Nadia puts on her Captain Save a Ho cape on. It was really ridiculous to me. Now, let's talk about the vein of my existence, Ander and Omar.
Boring!
You know how I complained that Ander had nothing going on in his life last season? Well, it seems like the writers hurt me because they decided to give him cancer. During this time, Ander is being kind of rude to Omar because, he might die of cancer. So Omar decides that this is the perfect opportunity to cheat on him with his sister's boyfriend. Ander tells him that it's okay if he sees other people since this whole situation is a lot, and he literally goes running to the club to have sex with Malik again. Ander ends up finding out that he's seen Malik after he reads their messages, so he decides to break up with Omar and say that he cheated on him so that he won't feel bad about what he did because he feels like this is all his fault anyways. After this, he decides that he doesn't want to keep doing the chemo and ends up telling Omar the truth about his cheating, which makes Omar mad, and he decides to leave for good to New York with Nadia and Malik. The only good or interesting part of this storyline was seeing Ander interact with Polo and Guzman, mainly because of Guzman, because we got to see him have this internal battle between wanting to be there for him and support him in what seems to be his last hours, unlike he did with Marina, but still be upset at the fact that he knew this entire time and said nothing, especially after he finds out that Ander has been hanging out with Polo. Now, at last, let's talk about the killer, Lou. So, much like Polo in season 1, we see her life kind of falling apart during this season after her dad cuts her off. However, unlike him, we also see things progressively get better for her, especially after she accepts that she and Guzman are over and Nadia decides to share her scholarship. So, to me, her being the killer was not a great idea. Now, the thing that makes her go off is her losing the scholarship, and she blames Polo for it, but it's actually her fault because she and Nadia decided to call him a murderer in front of everyone. Realistically speaking, what did they think would happen? Of course they're going to lose their scholarship. His moms are paying for it. No one made them do this. This was their choice. Then we have the fact that what made her go off was Polo telling her that Guzman didn't love her anymore. But that doesn't make any sense because we see her accepting this earlier in the season, and she actually ends their relationship for good after realizing that if they were to get back together, it would only be because he can be with Nadia. So how can this make her go off? It makes no sense to me. Editing me here, I just realized that I did not mention Samuel Guzman or Rebecca in any significant way. So let me quickly go over what they did. Samuel betrays Rebecca and her mom after making a deal with the police that if he puts a mic in their house, they will drop the charges against Nano. They obviously don't do that, so he just betrayed the only people who he has in his life for absolutely no reason. Rebecca starts to sell drugs after her mom goes to jail, but then she feels bad because Carla has like a really bad trip on some drugs that she gave her. So she ends up telling her mom when she comes out of jail to stop selling drugs or else she's going to leave the house. She also dates Samuel for like 15 minutes, but it's a terrible relationship because he doesn't want to be with her. He wants to be with Carla. And Guzman legitimately does absolutely nothing. He's just like upset during the first half of the season because, Polo is free. He kind of grovells a little bit over Nadia, but she's with Malik, so she doesn't care. And that's literally it. He doesn't do anything else. I know that I just spent like 5 minutes talking negatively about this season, but I actually did enjoy it way more than season 2, mainly because I actually believe that all these characters, with the exception of maybe Omar and the 2 new kids, had a reason to want him dead. I do think that if the creators and the writers of the show had some sense and didn't just use the show as a cash cow, they would have ended it here, because there's really nowhere else to go, as most of the important storylines end once Polo is dead. However, we know that didn't happen, and now we have 5 more seasons to go. So let's just get into that.
I really don't like that guy.
Season 4 is a new beginning for the show and the students after all of the chaos that has been going on. Anders' mom finally gets fired, and the school brings in a new principal called Benjamin, who comes in with his 3 children, Addie, Mencia, and Patrick. So the main storyline of this season revolves around Mencia. Mencia ends up getting cut off financially by Benjamin since she's so rebellious, and she ends up meeting this guy called Armando, who offers her a hotel room and then he gives her money after she has sex with him. One of the times that she's hanging out with him, she ends up coming across Rebecca's mom, who is back to selling drugs at clubs, even though Rebecca had asked her to stop. And she tells Mencia that she's too young to be a prostitute. Now, this matters because Mencia is at that point dating Rebecca, and obviously when she meets her mom, she recognizes her and tells her that if she doesn't tell Rebecca the truth, she will do it. However, Mencia ends up finding out that she sells drugs at the club, so now the both of them are blackmailing each other into not telling Rebecca the truth. Mencia keeps meeting up with Armando at this time, who tells her that one of his friends wants to meet up with her. And even though she agrees to do it, she regrets it almost immediately, but the guy doesn't care and almost assaults her until Rebecca, who had seen the hotel key, shows up and helps her escape. Rebecca tries to convince her to call the police, but she doesn't want anyone to know about what she's been doing. She ends up coming across Armando, who apologizes to her and tries to sleep with her again. However, it turns out that this whole thing was a plan by Rebe's mom to film her and make it seem like she was still doing it, which ends up backfiring after Mencia tells Rebecca that her mom is selling drugs again, so she decides to move out of the house. She ends up moving back in with Samu. However, Mencia convinces her to go to the hotel room that is being paid for by Armando because she was dumb enough to think that he was doing this out of the kindness of his heart. Of course, he was not, and after she turns him down, he ends up showing up to her house because it turns out that he was a donor at the school, and he tells her that if she doesn't keep sleeping with him, he will tell her dad everything. So she decides to go back to doing it and basically breaks up with Rebe. Rebecca knows that something weird is going on, so she goes to Addie and tells her everything. At the end, they host this huge party, and Armando is there bothering Mencia again, so Rebe punches him and they run away. After this, Addie goes up to him and tells him that she's going to tell her dad everything, so he starts to beat her up. This is where the mystery of the season relies. I didn't mention it before because I hate it and I don't think it was worth any suspense, but in the beginning of the show, Addie is shown laying in the water and surviving. So that's the mystery. Who pushed her? It turns out no one did, and she actually fell on her own, and this whole thing is a bait and switch because the real issue here is that after Armando punches her, he runs away and Guzman goes after him. They end up fighting for a bit, and then Guzman shoots him with a Bengala gun. And then Rebe and Samu help him cover it up by throwing his body into the water, and since Addie has her emergency, no one ever bothers to think about him. Now let's talk about the rest of the storyline, quickly mentioning Addie, Guzman, and Samuel. They have a love triangle. Addie is dating Guzman, but she's cheating on him with Samuel, and that's literally it.
Boring! Boring!
The reason why I just like this mystery is because we knew that Addie wasn't dead by the second episode, and the show did not do a good job at all at making me believe that Samu nor Guzman, who are the only people who could have done it, really would have been able to take it there. They do not show not even half of the anger than they showed in season 1 once they find out Addie is basically playing them, so I don't believe that they could have killed her. I feel like the bait and switch of who was really dead would have been much better if we had been made to believe during the entire season that Addie was dead. Also, if Armando had actually pushed her. I don't understand why they made her fall on her own, but whatever. Also, you could not pay me to care about Samuel being in yet another love triangle with yet another rich girl that thinks he's not good enough for her. I am sick of it. Give this guy something else to do. Another thing that I have a bone to pick here is Addie herself. I do not care for her as a character at all. She's like the poor man's version of Carla and Marina. She's supposed to have the same effortlessly cool, rebel aura that Marina had, while also being bitchy, cold, and mean in the way that Carla was. Her whole thing is that she's secretly this crazy party girl who definitely has an alcohol issue, but in public she has to pretend to be the perfect angel daughter because her siblings are both hot messes, and since her mother died, she's basically the only person in the family who can give them a little bit of peace. Which I don't think it's bad enough. I think it's a very interesting story. You know, something fun could have come out of that, especially when it came to her love triangle. It would have been interesting to see if Guzman and Samu also saw those similarities, but that's not really brought up, and I don't think that Addie is nearly as charismatic as Carla or Marina, so I was mostly just really annoyed by her existence. The last thing I'm going to say about these three has to do with the pacing of the show at this point. Addie's introduction scene is bizarre in the way that it feels like I have missed 30 minutes worth of episodes. The way the show shows it, it seems like they have known each other for some time and have had time to develop feelings for her. But no, they're in love with her the second they see her, and I just don't understand how Addie could get that out of someone. But yeah, when I watched that scene for the first time, I felt like I had missed something, but no, it was just bizarrely paced. As far as Mencina and Rebe, I really love that storyline. At first, Rebe is apprehensive about it, not just because someone fucked her up, but also because she wasn't sure that she was into girls. But it was really nice to see her finally getting to be loved and in an environment where she can be sweet and soft. Another thing I like is Mencia not being a rebel without a cause. She doesn't behave the way she does just because she has a thing for trouble, but because she was the reason for her mom's death. Years prior, she ran away. Her mom and Patrick went looking for her, and they ended up having an accident that killed her mom and put Patrick in a bed for 2 years. Ever since, her relationship with her dad has been cold and stiff because she feels that he blames her and has not forgiven her, and since she feels that he never will, she doesn't see the point in trying to be a good daughter. Now, let's talk about the rest of the people on this show, starting with none other than the bane of my existence, Omar and Ander, and now also Patrick.
Oh, Lord. Again.
Patrick takes interest in Ander the second he gets to the school, but he doesn't really want anything to do with him because of his dad. So he tells him that if he goes to a party with him, he will give Omar the answers to the test. He does, even though Omar tells him not to, and nothing happens even though he almost blows him. Ander tells Omar what happens at the party with Patrick and tells him that he's attracted to him, and even though Omar says he's not, they do end up having a threesome. From here on out, the storyline just keeps going in circles over and over and over. Ander has sex with Patrick, Omar gets mad and goes to confront Patrick about it, but oh, they have sex. Ander finds out, goes to confront Patrick, but oh, they have sex. So on and so forth, forever and always. Omar eventually tells Ander that he's in love with Patrick, who is actually in love with Ander, and tells him that he should just be alone, so he breaks up with Omar. Now, Patrick thinks that this means something for him and Ander, but Ander wants to play the field, so he ends up freaking out after seeing him making out with another guy. Patrick then does this bizarre thing where he goes to talk to Ander and calls Omar so that he can hear what he's saying. I don't know what his goal was, but Ander just says that he loves Omar, so nothing happened. After this, Omar tries to give the relationship a second chance, but he ends up convincing Ander to leave after his mom tells him that he had it planned twice now, but had stayed both times for Omar, so he tells him to just go because he wants him to be happy. The whole storyline is so lame and exhausting. I really hate that the writers did this to Omar and Ander's relationship. They could have been great, but instead they choose to have them constantly do this stupid back and forth and wasted their last season together on this bullshit. Also, remember what I said about the sex on the show back in season 1, and specifically about the throuple in that season? Well, instead of doing that, the writers start to do the opposite, where it seems like they think that the more sex they show the characters having, that means that the more in love they are. Because honest to God, I don't understand how these people keep catching such strong feelings for each other when the only thing they ever do is have sex. Every conversation, every meeting, and every interaction starts and ends with sex on their mind. Now, to end my misery and move on from this season, let's talk about Cayetana and her new partner, Philip. So Philip is a new kid who came from Spain. He's a member of royalty, and it's later revealed that the reason why he's in Spain is because he was accused of sexual assault in Paris and decided to run away. Meanwhile, Cayetana is now a different person who has decided to get ahead on her own merit and hard work instead of using people, which is great, I guess. She's immediately smitten and obsessed with Philip, and she's actually the only person who likes him because he immediately starts to get preferential treatment and no one wants anything to do with him. So after interacting a total of 2 times in one episode, they end up having sex because of course they do. They basically start to date after this until she realizes that he has cameras in his rooms and filmed her the first time they had sex. He says that he did it so that he could have proof if she were to accuse him of something because he claims that the accusations against him are false, and deletes the video because he still wants to get to know her. She ends up forgiving him and believing him about the allegations being false, but she's still skeptical about whether or not he deleted the video, so when she goes to his house, she tries to go through his computer and he gets mad at her because she doesn't trust him. They end up making up, but they go to a party and he tries to rape her. He apologizes, but she doesn't want to hear it, and his mom ends up telling her to just forget about everything and get with him but she doesn't really want to do it, so she doesn't. I still love Cayetana despite it all. There is a scene with the first breakup where she admits that to some degree she was using him still, and I love that. She could not have just changed that drastically out of nowhere. I'm glad that they brought that back. Now onto Philip. He's portrayed as someone who is pretty small and pathetic despite the money, the fame, the titles, the whatever. He doesn't have an imposing image or personality. I really like that he wasn't portrayed as this crazy and scary guy, because most people like him are not like that, and the reason why he got away with what he did is because of his position in society, not because he himself is someone who is scary. So I like that. Other than that, fuck this guy. He's literally a rapist. And yes, he denied it here, but he confirms it later. So there's that.
That is one big pile of shit.
Samuel is dead, and Benjamin obviously killed him. But we're still going to pretend for the next 8 episodes that anyone else could have done it. Anyways, following everything that happened last season, Samuel goes from being in love with Addie to being in love with Benjamin. Okay, maybe this is rude on my part, but he starts to see this guy as a father figure and does literally any and everything he tells him to do. After almost having a brush with death, Addie starts to act out, which Benjamin doesn't like, so he tells Samuel to keep her on a leash, which he can't really do because she's the one in charge in this relationship. Following his obsession with Benjamin, Samuel ends up quitting his job after he gets mad that he's working at the restaurant instead of networking at a party, which further makes Addie mad because she wanted him to spend the time with her. And she ends up meeting this guy called Ivan, who we will talk about later, and ends up having sex with him after telling him that she wants to be with someone who doesn't need money.
Ciao. Anyways,
in the middle of this party, Omar, who also works at the restaurant, ends up coming across Armando's body, which has resurfaced. Samuel tries to convince him and Rebe to help him put the body back in the water, but Omar tells him to just call the police. From this case, Benjamin starts to be investigated because the two of them had some shady businesses going on. Benjamin talks with Samuel and asks him if he or Guzman did it because earlier Samuel had told him not to worry about Armando because he was never going to come back, but he denies it. Addie tries to get him to confess through a message but drops it after he brings up her cheating on him. Eventually, he agrees to take the blame after Benjamin promises that he will make sure that he gets off and will take care of him when he's out. However, this was bullshit, and Benjamin doesn't want to pay his bail. He tells Mencia that if they got rid of the documents that Armando had on him, he would pay for it, and she just so happens to have a copy of those documents. Great. However, she knows that he's a piece of shit and knows that he won't pay for anything, so she reveals that she has another copy of them. Eventually, Addie gets the money, and when Samuel comes back, he finds out that Benjamin had nothing to do with him being out, which makes him upset. So he decides to work with the police so that Benjamin will go to jail instead of him. He ends up getting the documents thanks to Rever, who gets it from Mencia and decides to go to the police, but before he can give it to them, Benjamin asks him to meet up, and like an idiot, he agrees to go. Benjamin gives him an account in which he has enough money to pay for college and promises a spot on the board of one of his companies when he graduates. Samuel tells him that he can't buy him, and when he is going to leave, Benjamin pushes him and he hits his head on the board of the pool before falling in. Benjamin thinks about letting him drown, but Patrick shows up, so he asks him for help, getting him out and hiding the body. Sadly for him, Rebe, Mencia, Addie, and Omar end up showing up, and they call the police, so he gets arrested. Much like I said in the previous season recap, this season would have benefited much from not telling us that Samuel dies, and just making it seem like the mystery is going to be who gets framed for Armando's death, since Guzman is gone. But the second I started the episode and I saw the kid in the pool, I already knew that the killer was Benjamin. There was literally no other option, and then it was revealed and I just didn't care. Now let's move on to the other story, because every time I think about this storyline, I get so annoyed. So let's talk about the ridiculous that is Ivan, Patrick, Addie, and Cruz. Ivan is a new kid at the school who is the son of a football player called Cruz. When he gets to the school, Patrick is immediately smitten by him, but Ivan keeps insisting that he's straight, even though he's constantly teasing Patrick, and he's actually really into Addie, who uses him and cheats on Samuel with him multiple times throughout the show. So Patrick eventually gets really tired of this and ends up having a conversation with Cruz, Ivan's dad, about his feelings for Ivan, and these two end up kissing.
I can't believe that there are people that would do something like this.
So after that, Cruz is like, oh, we can't be together, but I still want you to come to my room. And after that, Ivan finally decides to give it a try to this relationship. So obviously Patrick breaks up with Cruz, or ends whatever they had. Ivan ends up sleeping with Addie again, But after that, he ends up catching Patrick and Cruz kissing in the pool at his house. So he ends up getting like super mad. He goes to Ibiza with some friends, and when he comes back, he decides to leave the country and go to Qatar with his dad. But his dad ends up apologizing to him, tells Patrick that they can be together, and convinces Ivan to be with Patrick. This storyline was such a hot mess. For one, I don't understand why this show has such a hard-on for semi or fully incestuous relationships. Why did this love square have to involve two siblings and a father and a son? There were other characters on this show, and even if there hadn't been, you could just write this differently. Addie sucks in every way possible. She's a terrible girlfriend and an even worse sister. Why would she do that to her brother multiple times? It's not like it was a one mistake and done situation, which would be bad enough, but every chance she gets to have sex with Ivan, she takes it, even though she's well aware of how Patrick feels for him. Then we have Patrick and Cruz. I think it's funny how this relationship is never called predatory or inappropriate when the last season, and even in this one, it's pointed out multiple times how the relationship between Mencia and Armando was those things. And these relationships are basically the same, with the exception that Patrick is not getting paid. But this is just as disgusting as that was. We also have the hot mess express that is Ivan. I think the show was trying to portray him as someone who was bi-curious or maybe a little bit confused about his preferences, but instead he just came off as an asshole that was queer-baiting Patrick and stringing him along for his own entertainment while he waited for the person that he really wanted to be available. Another thing in this story is Omar. I don't even remember if he and Patrick were seriously dating or if they broke up. I don't even remember if he ever interacted with Ivan at all, to be honest. He's just so unimportant in this season. But while we're on the topic, let me quickly talk about this story. He meets this guy called Bilal, who is supposed to be a main character, but you know he's not because he's black. They meet at the restaurant and he tries to help him by getting him a job, but catches him stealing, so he kicks him out. And then the day of the party, he gets kicked out by Samu, who catches him doing what? Trying to steal. So he ends up helping Omar pull Armando's body off the water, and then he disappears, never to be seen again, at least until the next season. Now, the last storyline, Cayetana, Philip, and Isadora. Isadora is an Argentinian Ibiza-based DJ and influencer that is coming to the school, and she's a huge fan of Philip for some reason, and she has as her one goal in life to make people move on from the fact that he's a rapist. Meanwhile, Philip and Cayetana end up getting back together, but in order for them to move on, Cayetana tells him that she wants him to go to this type of therapy for them to figure things out and really fix them so that she can trust him again. But he gets mad after she calls him a predator, and he refuses to take responsibility for anything that he did. So he breaks up with her and starts to fake date Isadora because she tells him that if they're fake dating and people think that they're together, they will just move on. Isadora tries to do everything in her power to get Philip to like her, but he's still in love with Cayetana, and he eventually breaks up with Isadora because she's a drug addict. After he breaks up with her, she decides to go to Ibiza with Ivan and these three other kids called Alex, Hugo, and Javi. And Philip ends up getting jealous and follows them there. At this party, they get super drunk, super high, and those three other kids end up raping Isadora after Ivan and Philip pass out. When they come back, Philip and Ivan know that something happened, but they don't know what because they don't remember, and Isadora is acting like everything is fine. So Philip asks Cayetana to talk to her, and the only thing Cayetana tells her is that regardless of what happened and regardless of what she wants to do, she will support her and be there for her. At the end, the other three kids end up showing Philip and Ivan a video of them raping Isadora. So Philip ends up telling Isadora about this and convinces her to go and talk to the police. This whole storyline was super bizarre. For some reasons, the writers were dead set on redeeming Philip, but then didn't even do it right. He never takes actual responsibility for what he did to the girl in France or to Calle. They just blame the alcohol, and then Calle still has to appease him because he doesn't want to accept that he's a predator, and he never pays for his crimes. I never understood why Isa was so dead set on not believing his victims. You might be thinking that Isa is helping him for clout or money, but she's not. She actually loses a bunch of fans after making their fake relationship public, and straight up tells him that he can't give her anything. He can't do anything for her socially. She just wants people to move on, and I don't understand why she cares so much about this. She doesn't know this man. She has nothing to do with him or with either of the victims. I don't understand the motives at all. I thought that at some point it would be revealed that maybe she had first-hand experience with false accusations or something, but no, she just really did want to support a rapist. I also don't like her story and the way that it ends. Yes, she's a piece of shit, but no, she didn't deserve to be victimized just so that she can learn a lesson or whatever. Overall, this storyline has to be one of the worst things that I've had to see on this show so far, and I hated every second of it.
Stop it. Get some help.
Following the arrest of Benjamin, the only one who has gone to see him is Addie, and he tells her to go back to school so that they can pretend everything is fine, or else he's going to cut them off. Luckily for them, things are a little bit easier given that none of the old characters are there, which is really sad for me, but at last. In the school, we meet Nico, who is a trans student who has come back after getting gender affirmation surgery. Nico has a girlfriend or a friend with benefits called Rocio, but she's deeply irrelevant, so this is probably the only time I'm going to mention her. The real story of the season is being developed with Patrick, Ivan, and Cruz, and the mystery of the season is who ran over Ivan. So after the events of last season, Ivan and Patrick start to date. Ivan decides to move into Patrick's house after one of his dad's parties, but Patrick isn't a huge fan and tells Cruz to convince him not to. During this conversation, Cruz tells him that they still like each other and kisses him, and Ivan catches them. Days later, a video of Cruz and Patrick kissing is leaked, so Patrick decides to take the blame for it, but Cruz decides to just bite the bullet and come out as gay, and again, no one is concerned about this seemingly middle-aged man having a seemingly sexual relationship with a minor. This decision starts to cost him immediately after he loses advertisements and starts to receive death threats, but he doesn't want Ivan to know, so he ends up telling him to move in with Patrick. Things get significantly worse after Cruz loses a football game, which causes a riot at the stadium. After this, Ivan goes to a club to get wasted while his dad is at home doing the same. Patrick calls Cruz and asks him to go pick them up, and when he's about to do it, he almost crashes into another car, and then 3 guys come out and beat him up, just when Ivan and Patrick arrive home and find him dead. Ivan is obviously super depressed about all of this and starts to push Patrick away because he thinks that he's partially responsible for it since he's the reason why his dad came out, and if he hadn't done that, he would still be alive. He also says this after Patrick catches him having sex with Addie. Again,
Nothing new, nothing changed, same old shit. Same old fucking shit.
Ivan eventually tries to fix things with Patrick, but he tells him that he's been using him and runs off. Ivan tries to go after him, and this is when he gets run over by none other than Mencia. Now, Mencia spends the entire season kind of trapped in this triangle, not a love one, just a triangle. What happens is that she meets this girl called Sara and her boyfriend Raul. They're influencers, they're like a couple channel, I guess, but Mencia really quickly realizes that Raul is beating her and she wants to help her. Mencia tries to get her away from Raul and into their friend group so that they can bond a little bit and help her escape, but this is really difficult because Raul is super controlling and wants either to be with her all of the time or wants her to stay at home all of the time. He's also super manipulative and convinces her that Mencia is just trying to break them apart, so she starts to avoid Mencia and he starts to show up to school all of the time to keep an eye on Sara. Despite this, she does end up breaking up with him and decides to go out with Mencia. Raul ends up breaking into this party and decides to drug Mencia in order to separate her from Sara. After she gets drugged, Mencia decides to go look for Addie, who was missing at the time, but Sara decides to drive for her since she was clearly not in the right state. Mencia passes out on the board and Sara is the one who actually runs Ivan over. Then, with help from Raul, who had been following them, they set the scene to make it look like Mencia was the one driving. This whole storyline was so stress-inducing. Thankfully, the scenes where Raul beats Sara are not explicit or anything, but they still suck to watch. A lot of people hate Sara because she kept going back to him and trusting him, but it makes sense. The average domestic violence victims take 7 attempts to leave before they leave for good, so I get it, especially because they're financially attached given their relationship. The way the show frames it, it seems like social media is what's paying for their lives, so it's really not just as easy as getting up and leaving. Also, she's a teenager, so I don't expect her to make the perfect right decision every time. I don't really have much to say about Ivan and Patrick. Ivan sucks so much, and I understand why he's acting out. I understand his point of view. I get it. I think he has the right to be mad at Patrick for fooling around with his dad and in a non-logical, grieving way. A right to think that he's partially responsible for his death, but he still sucks. Meanwhile, Patrick has basically become Omar. All he does is suffer, mop around about being in love with someone who doesn't love him back, and get cheated on. So I don't really care about anything that he has going on either. I never really cared about Patrick to begin with because the show never really developed into his personal issues that came to be after his car accident, and just spent most of the show portraying him as a drug addict, sex-obsessed pervert, which is also how Ivan is portrayed, by the way. So I never really clicked with these characters at all. Let's now go back to Adi, so that we can finish that storyline and never have to think about that girl ever again. Adi invites Nico on a date and they go to a drag bar, but Nico gets mad because she's not treating him like she would any other guy. Like, let's be honest, she would have never invited Samu to a drag bar. That would have never happened. So she apologizes and they have a drink. Adi gets drunk, so he gets mad at her, thinking that the reason why she wants to get wasted is so that she doesn't have to see him naked. Remember Bilal? He's back again, and even though Adi is low-key racist towards him, they end up having sex after she has an argument with Nico. After many more dramas, Nico decides to get surgery to get a penis, but his parents say no, so he starts to sell his hormones to other students in order to make money. He ends up selling some form of drug, I don't know which one, to Isa for her to use against her rapist, and she ends up paying him $20,000 that he needs for the surgery. Meanwhile, Adi visits her dad and he asks her to convince her siblings to testify in his favor so that he can get off since they're the only witnesses. She says no at first because she doesn't believe that it was an accident, but after Mencia runs over Ivan, she ends up agreeing and convincing her siblings to do it too. Listen, I just really don't want to have to talk about Adi anymore. She sucks. She's still terrible. She's a terrible partner. She's a terrible sister. She's also a bit transphobic and racist on top of being classist. She's the worst, and I will never understand what about her is so alluring that every single man on the show wanted so desperately to be with her. But she's gone now and I can finally be free. As far as Nico goes, I think he's fine, whatever. He reminds me of Samu in the sense that he's really boring. I do like that they didn't go the route of having him be like troubled or have a broken home or be super bullied at school for his gender identity. Maybe that would have been more accurate, but I think we have enough of that. Now, let's talk about the most irrelevant story this season, Bilal and Rocio. Rocio is a new character that is not introduced at all. She's just there and now we're supposed to act like she has always been a part of the group. But the only piece of personality she has is that she wants to reconnect with her African roots, and she tries to do so through Bilal, who tells her that she's not African because she was born in Spain. We see Rocio pining after Bilal while he pines after Adi, because of course he does, only for him to develop an interest in her after she buys him a watch and then disappears from the show. I read that the actor had filmed a scene for the finale in which he gets killed, but they scraped it, so he literally disappears into thin air, never to be seen or mentioned ever again. This could have been an interesting story if this was a better show that tried to start some discussions about diasporas and the disconnect that exists between the children of immigrants that are born in a different country and are told that they really aren't from either place, and the plight of immigrants and refugees who want to create as much space as they can from their culture in order to assimilate quickly for a better life. But this is elite, so of course such thing does not happen. Now, the last story of the season, Isadora. Isadora is going through it. She has stopped taking her meds and is depressed because her parents aren't there to help her. On top of this, one of her employees, Dadik, who is of course also a student, accuses her of lying about being raped, and her mom tells her that her case is going to be thrown out because they didn't have any proof. And so they're allowed to go back to school, and it turns out that none other than Didak is friends with the three rapists. Despite trusting his friends and supporting them, Didak is a little bit suspicious, so he gets one of them, Javi, drunk and records him admitting to the rape. He gives this to Isa and they take it to the police, but they say that this is not good proof, so she gives up on trying to get justice and instead decides to get revenge. Didak tells Isa that revenge is not justice and that Javi regrets what he did, but she says that if he regrets it, he should go to the police. After this, the three rapists decide to come up with a plan to turn Isa's ire towards someone else, so they tell her that Ivan and Philip also raped her and that they were the ones who planned it, lied about the existence of the video, and Ivan was the first one to go for it. But Javi immediately regrets it and ends up sending her a voicemail telling her that that wasn't true. While all of this is happening, there is some drama between her mom Roberta and Didak's brother Pau. They're doing businesses because both families own hotels, but her mom ends up getting mad and kicks Pau out and fires Didak. Hugo, meanwhile, says that he can't get hard anymore and tells the other rapist, Alex, that the last time he got hard was when they raped Isa, so they decide to go and try rape someone else. But just in that moment, Javi calls the police and shows them the video from Ibiza and apologizes to Isa, and they all get arrested. Isa then goes to Didac and tells him that she won't be able to trust anyone and asks him if he's willing to put up with that, and they kiss right when someone shows up to the school and shoots at it. This storyline is a bit annoying to me. On one hand, I am glad that Isa had some growth, but on the other, it seems like she just had a whole personality transplant. I think they were trying to recreate the friend group of the original season and use this storyline to do it, but it doesn't work when none of these people have interacted with each other prior to the first episode, and 3 of them weren't even here last year. I also have a problem with Isa never directly addressing the way she treated Philip's victims and the way she talked about their cases and never apologizing for it, because it just seems to me like the only reason why she cares about this now is because she was victimized and nothing more, and she only cares about her case, not about anything else. Then we have Didac. I couldn't care less about this guy even if I tried. The way he came in, guns blazing, attacking her to protect his little friend was disgusting. I also thought it wasn't super realistic how fast he's changed his mind, especially because nothing really happened to make him start to be suspicious of Javi. And about the drama with their families, I don't care. I don't really care that much about any of the parents' business. Of course, they have been present in all seasons and have influenced the things that happen to move the story forward, but I feel like they're going to end up taking a lot of space and time from the teen characters that we really don't have and that I really don't want to see.
It's time to stop! It's time to stop, okay?
This season, there is no mystery. Not really. You would think that it would be who shut up the school, but it's not. We find out in the second episode that Roberta was behind it and it's never brought up again. The mystery is revealed in literally the last episode, which is the only good episode in this entire season, and it is who got thrown out of a building. The potential victims are Raul, Rocio and her mom, and Eric, a new character that is Nico's cousin. So let's start with the situation that finished the last season, Isa, Didac, and their families. It turns out that Didac's family wants Isa to sell one of their buildings to them, and when they refuse to do so, they start to buy the individual apartments in order to get it. I don't really understand how this could work, because wouldn't they need their approval to sell those apartments? It makes no sense to me. Maybe I didn't understand it correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong. But anyways, in order to stop this from happening, Isa's dad Martin has been bribing Rocio's mom Catalina, who is a judge, in order to get her to evict the people who live in the building under the lie that the building is falling apart so that they can demolish it and keep the land. While this is all happening, they are being investigated by the police, specifically a police officer called Luis, who went undercover at the school and is now the principal on a mission that makes no sense to me. He's been undercover for God knows how many years and has been grinding in order to get to the principal position in order to spy on 2 teens that had nothing to do with their parents' businesses and weren't even here 2 years ago. It makes no sense. Anyways, meanwhile, Catalina tells her parents that it would be easier if their name wasn't in any documents, so Martin decides to give Isa ownership over their company that owns the building. After this, he tells Isa to sign the documents in which she orders for the demolition of the building, again telling her that the building is in ruins and that the people who live there are in danger. This building ends up being the one that Omar and his friends live in, so they end up convincing her to backtrack the demolition. Meanwhile, Didac and Isa keep going on this annoying back and forth, breaking up and getting back together basically every day until the investigator goes to Didac and tells him what they're doing, and he decides to help him get whatever information he can get. Isa, meanwhile, talks to her mom, who tells her about what's going on, which I already explained. Isa ends up catching Didac spying on her, so he takes her to Luis and they ask her to help him, but she says no. Instead, she tells her parents that she will give Catalina the documents that they have on her so that they can all move on. Isa and her dad decide to meet up with Catalina, but it turns out that Martin had sent her the wrong address and she and Rocio were stuck on a rooftop, but plot twist, Isa had given the information to the police and had recorded her dad, so he and Catalina get arrested. Just like I thought, the Paris took a significant amount of time, but I didn't hate it entirely. I think Martin in particular was very good, and actually the worst part of the story was Isa and Didac. Their constant breaking up and getting back together was super annoying. Didac is still not interesting, and Isa is just so unbearable, constantly flip-flopping about whether or not she wants to be with Didac or whether or not she wants to trust her parents. I can understand her lack of trust in people and not wanting to betray her family, but it was so annoying to watch basically the exact same scene every single episode. The next possible victim is Eric. As I mentioned, Eric is Nico's cousin, and he joins the story after he gets arrested during a protest and his mom decides to bring him home since he has nowhere to go. Nico tells him to go to the doctor and get some medicine since he's not stable. They never say exactly what he has, but he's unstable. Instead of doing that, he decides to just leave the house, but then goes back and agrees to see the doctor after kissing Rocio. Speaking of Rocio, she ends up leaving her house after she finds out that her mom is being bribed and goes to Nico's house. That night, she has sex with Eric and tells him that he's not been acting like himself, so he decides to leave, get off his meds, and do a bunch of drugs. When he eventually comes back home, Nico has finally had enough of him and tells him to leave. Eric is obviously not doing well, so he ends up going on a rooftop, and before he jumps, he writes into this app that was implemented at the school for students to contact when they feel bad. And Sonia, do you remember her, is the one who answers him. So she goes and gets Nico, who convinces him not to jump. This whole storyline was so annoying, and every time it came out, I just wanted to skip. As I said, we never get a diagnosis for Eric, and I think that that's just so that the writers can make him do whatever bullshit they want without people calling them out on misrepresenting a specific mental illness. But they end up just misrepresenting them all. I also think that they did a terrible job at developing Eric as a character beyond his mental issues. We really don't know anything about him. We didn't even learn why he's not living with his parents. So he's really just an empty vessel so that the writers can make him act crazy. Everyone else in the story is just as bad, if not worse. Sonia is barely in like 3 episodes. She and Nico try to get together, but it's all thrown out of the window after she sees him having sex with another girl. And then she's put in charge of the app, which is also irrelevant because it's only used like twice in the entire season, so who cares? Meanwhile, the only interesting thing Rocio does is in the other storyline we talked about, and we barely mentioned it because she doesn't really matter there either. I think it would have been nice to see her like be transformed after learning about what her mom does, and see her change her mind after spending some time with Eric in a protest, but that would mean that you would have to give a black character screen time in an actual story, and that would never happen on this show. Now, if you were paying attention, you would know that that means Raul is a person who got thrown off the building. So here's how it happened. After the accident, he and Sara obviously get back together, and he keeps hurting her and isolating her from the rest of the world. Meanwhile, Sara catches Raul masturbating to a photo of Chloe. Chloe is a classmate of hers who is super sexual and has a sex tape leaked on the first day of school. Anyways, Sara decides to get close to Chloe and invites her to her house, but doesn't tell her about her plan, which is super fucked up. What she wants is to film her having sex with Raul so that she can expose him as a cheater without losing followers or money and be able to leave him. Chloe decides to help her, but she betrays her by basically portraying her as like a dirty slut, which obviously makes her mad. After this, Sara finally breaks up with Raul, and Chloe decides to try and get with him as a way to get back at her. Immediately after, they start a couples channel of their own, and he starts to control her, much like he did Sara, by asking her to behave and dress in a more conservative way. During this time, Chloe has been fighting with her mom for a reason that I will talk about in a minute, so Raul decides to invite her to their house to talk things out, but she only tells Chloe that she has been changing because of Raul, and she should go back to being how she was before. So Chloe ends up sneaking out of the house and cheating with Eric. But don't feel too sorry for Raul, because he also cheats on her with Sara, who is jealous of them being together and films them having sex to send it to Chloe. Chloe then tries to break up with him, but he hits her, and in that moment, her mom, who has talked to Sara, shows up and barges into their house. She tells Chloe to leave and goes to the rooftop with Raul. They argue a little bit, and he even tries to strangle her, but she ends up pushing him off the building and killing him. After this, she and Chloe talk to the police and make it seem like it was suicide. I honestly enjoyed this storyline for the most part, but only thanks to Chloe and her mom, Carmen. Sara is a mess, and I guess I understand, but I can't support. When she brought Chloe into that house without talking to her first, she could have gotten her raped. Also, her reasoning behind getting Chloe and Raul to break up is not entirely clear to me. I don't know if she did that because she does care about Chloe or just because she wants to get back with Raul. Definitely seems like the later, and while again, I can understand because she's a victim of domestic violence and I understand how that works, I can't support it. Meanwhile, Chloe and her mom, Carmen, are a perfect hot mess. It's very clear that Carmen is one of those moms that see their daughter as a competition for men's attention and resources, while at the same time teaching her that her body is the only thing that she can offer to men. I can only imagine how growing up with that woman must have been like, especially after she does what she does, which we'll talk about in a minute. That makes it clear that she's willing to go way too far to get the things that she wants. Anyway, I keep mentioning the thing that she did that is unforgivable, so I'm just gonna put you out of your misery and tell you what it is. We learned that Carmen is actually Ivan's mom, and that up to now she has been receiving a steady paycheck from Cruz as long as she stays away from them. However, now that he's dead, those payments have stopped, and she now wants to get close to Ivan. When Carmen finds out that Ivan is selling his old house, she decides to show up there, and they end up finding a photo of Carmen with Cruz. So she makes up a story about being a groupie, and in a coke-induced bad decision, they start to kiss and almost have sex until she comes to her senses and leaves. Ivan goes to talk to Carmen about what happened, and she says that she's never gonna have anything to do with him and that it was a mistake. And Chloe, who overhears this, ends up telling him the truth. When he finally decides to talk to Carmen, he tells her that they're not son and mother and agrees to give her $2 million so that she will stay away from him. This whole situation is so disturbing and clearly controversial for the sake of it. I don't understand why we ever needed to take it there at all. I genuinely thought that they were gonna do it. I was so scared watching this scene. I seriously thought it was gonna happen. Thankfully it didn't, but I mean, we still have one season to go. It could still happen. We don't know. I don't want to talk about this anymore. I'm over it. Let's just continue. So 2 years after everything that's happened with Samuel, Omar has tried to move on, but he's been through it. He was super depressed at one point and tried to kill himself, but was ultimately saved by Joel, who was a homeless kid staying at the place he worked at, and he ended up moving together with him and they started a relationship. He ends up getting an internship at Las Encima for his app, which is the app that Eric uses, and while at first he doesn't want to do it, he ends up agreeing after he finds out that Joel met Ivan, who fell in love with him at first sight, and immediately offered to pay for him to go to the school. They end up being stuck in the same old love triangle bullshit, in which of course Omar has to be the one who's suffering. While all of this nonsense was going on, Ivan got into a student exchange to South Africa and asked Joel to go with him. Omar tells him to go so that he can be happy, but he decides to stay so that he can continue to torment this man. But thankfully, he decides to go back to therapy, so I guess that's a win. Immediately no to this relationship. Why is Omar, as a grown-ass man, depending emotionally and sexually on a teenager who was probably only with him so that he's not homeless? I hate everything about it. This whole situation is so insanely bizarre because Ivan literally falls in love with him the second he sees him. I actually thought that maybe I had missed something, some background, maybe it was like going to be revealed that they knew each other from before, but no, he just fell for him the second he saw him. That's it. The relationship between Joel and Omar is also bizarre because Joel does not give a fuck about him. I know that I said that he's probably only with him so that he's not homeless and they're obviously trauma bonded, but Joel cheats on Omar the second he gets a chance to. He doesn't even stop to think about it, and whenever they're together, he seems super annoyed by his presence. There's no warmth, no love, or even like. He just seems like he can't stand him. It's very weird. There's one last character on this show that I have not mentioned. I don't remember his name right now, so you're gonna have to forgive me for that. But this guy that you're gonna see on the screen, I'm gonna put his name right here. He is roommates with Omar and Joel, and his only thing that he does in the entire season is show up to the house when they're having sex and look at them in a disapproving way. That's literally the only thing he does. But then in the last episode, it's revealed that he recorded Carmen when she threw Raul off the building. So even though they're gonna try to make it seem like a suicide, he has like proof that it was a murder. And I guess we'll see next season what he does with that. Finally, we are in season 8 so that we can all be put out of our misery. This season's format is very similar to that of season 1 in the sense that every single character, or most of them, could have possibly killed the victim, which is Joel, because they all have a problem with him at one point or another. So let's go character per character in order to dismantle their motivations. This season we're introduced to Hector and Emilia. They are part of an organization called Alumni that basically helps the student make connections and stuff. It's kind of like a frat or a sorority. And these two kids basically control the school because of the huge donation that their parents made. Hector and Joel know each other from social media somehow. They never really explained the extent of their relationship before the show, but there's a lot of tension there, and Hector ends up offering to sponsor him in order to join Alumni. Through Alumni, Joel ends up meeting these two people whose names I don't remember, and he ends up having sex with them in exchange for money. At some point, he ends up having sex with Hector, and he tells Joel that he loves him, to which he responds by laughing and saying that he's only using him to get what he wants. wants. This is the night that he gets killed, and Hector is obviously the person who finds him as he wakes up next to his dead body. Emilia is also a possible killer because she and Hector have a semi-incestuous relationship, and she's super jealous of the fact that Hector is obsessed with Joel, and in fact, Hector ends up blaming her for killing him and tells her that she's dead to him because of it. Next, we have Ivan, who comes back to the school. They get into their same old back and forth bullshit, and eventually they have one final breakup after Ivan finds out that he's a prostitute, and he and Dalmar end up getting arrested for the murder because they were near his body when he was found. Next, we have Eric, Chloe, and Carmen. What ends up happening here is that Dalmar tries to blackmail Carmen for $100K in exchange for the video because he's about to get deported, but he ends up getting caught by Carmen, and instead she tells him to delete the video or she will hurt herself and tell the police he did it. She also tries to offer him a lesser sum in order for him to leave the country on his own. Dalmar tells all of this to Joel, who gets really upset and decides to blackmail Carmen himself and asks her for €250,000. Chloe tells Eric about all of this because they're now dating since Rocio has disappeared, and he tells her that they should threaten Joel in order to get him to leave them alone, and they do so with a pocket knife that is later found on the murder scene. The last possible responsibles are Isa and Luis. So after everything that happened last season, Isa starts to have sex with Luis in exchange for protection and help since her family is super broke and her dad ends up getting killed in jail. After Luis finds out about the orgies that Joel and the rest of the alumni are having in her building, he starts to blackmail her into having more sex in exchange for not raiding the place. She ends up getting mad at Joel and tells him to stop because this is really fucking with her life, and he then goes and tells Luis that he's going to use his connections to ruin his life. Before I actually tell you who the killer is and how they find out, let's quickly go over the storylines that don't really have much to do with it. First, Nadia comes back to the school to support Omar after his breakdown from last season, but it's all for nothing because she's literally in like 4 scenes and doesn't do anything. Meanwhile, Omar ends up getting beaten up almost to death by Hector and the rest of the alumni after getting in the middle of him and Joel. Then Sonia, the only thing she does is date Dalmar and then break up after he has sex with Chloe. And lastly, Sarah and Nico start to date, and Sarah spends the entire season obsessed over trying to find out proof that Chloe killed Raul. Now, back to the main storyline, we end up learning that Luis was the person who killed Joel after he threatened him. Chloe ended up getting this on camera because she was filming the room in which it happened, since this is where she and Eric were going to threaten Joel, and for some reason she wanted that on camera. At this point, Dalmar is about to take the blame for everything because this has now turned into a media storm and he has been deemed as guilty by the public because he's a black immigrant. So Carmen tells him that if he says he's guilty, he'll get a shorter time and she will take care of his family. Before he does that though, Emilia tells the police that Hector killed him and she helped him hide it because she didn't want Hector to get away from her. Isa tells everyone everything that's been going on with Luis, and they give the video to Omar since they can't go to the police because Luis is a police officer and he's the one investigating the case, obviously. He ends up telling Emilia and Hector that if they confess to beating him up, he will give them the video, but Hector ends up offering him ownership of the school in exchange for the video, and he takes it. Luis finds out that Omar has the video and threatens him, so Isa decides to invite him over to her apartment, and while they're busy, they post a video of the murder online. The police shows up to the club, Luis gets arrested, and before he's taken away, he passes out and dies of an overdose. At the end of the show, Omar shuts down the school, Chloe and her mom leave the country, God knows what happens to Dalmar because he is not mentioned, and all the remaining children end up going to the public school that Nadia, Christian, and Samuel were attending before the first season started. And that's it. That's season 8. I actually enjoyed it. I think it was way better than anything that has happened since season 4 and onwards, but as hard as they tried, I don't think that they went back to the glory days of season 1. Something that I did enjoy is that much like in season 1, the class and race commentary is much stronger than in the rest of the show. In season 1 and 8, the classism, racism, Islamophobia, and xenophobia are much more prominent than in the rest of the show, and I like that. In this season, Dalmar and Ivan both get blamed for the murder, but Ivan gets out because he's famous, so people start to vouch for him. Meanwhile, Dalmar doesn't know anyone, and if someone like him gets accused of murder, everyone would and does believe it without a second thought. Hector and Emilia, I wish had been introduced earlier in the show, maybe season 7 or 6, because I think that would have made the show much more interesting, and I would have liked to know more about them and their family. They have a very cruel intentions type relationship going on, and I would have liked to see them create chaos at the school instead of spending so much time on the kids' parents the last 2 seasons. Sarah during the season was super annoying. She spent the entire 5 scenes that she had talking about how she wants Chloe to go to jail for killing Raul, and I just couldn't care less. She should be doing cartwheels of happiness that he's dead, but instead she's still obsessed with Chloe. And all of that for nothing, because when she gets the video, she doesn't go to the police immediately, so nothing happens. Nico continues to be boring and lame. Sonia is also boring and lame. Eric is never fully developed, and I feel like this season is even worse because now his mental health is just something that is weaponized against Chloe, so it's not even his issue anymore. Issa's storyline was kind of whatever to me. I did think that Luis was going to be a weirdo just because of how his plan came about last season, but I think that the switch up was so dramatic it kind of came out of nowhere, and they never explained why he was so obsessed with her. Nadia is a waste of time and space this season. She doesn't do anything, she doesn't add anything, she doesn't help in anything. She's just there because the writers promised that some of the old characters would come back, and now they have to give that to the viewers. There's this one scene that really got to me in which she told Omar that revenge wasn't good and that he was becoming like the rich kid simply because he wanted to shut down the school. I'm sorry, but in what world is that similar in any way to even the least harmful thing some of these kids have done? I really hate when poor characters are written to be so nice and so noble that they have no sense of self-preservation. That's the same reason why I really don't like Dalmar as a character. I don't really know why he didn't go straight to the police when he learned that aiding in a crime investigation was a way to not get deported. He didn't even know Carmen or that she was Chloe's mom, so that's not the reason why he didn't do it. And deciding to blackmail her doesn't even make that much sense to me, because who is to say that the person in the video has money to give him? Ivan and Joel continue to be an unbearable couple. They break up and get back together a bunch of times like always. I think the worst part in this season was the expectation that weren't met. This season was promoted with this photo that made it seem like loose ends of previous seasons would be tied, and there were rumors that some of the old characters would cameo, but none of that actually happened. We got a mention of Lou and Samu, and Nadia came back to do absolutely nothing, but that was it. No mention of Didac, who suddenly disappeared. No mention of Rocio, who also disappeared, even though she was the main love interest of Eric last season, and that her mom went to jail because of Isa. No mention of Mencia, Patrick, or Adi, and even Ivan's accident never comes back. Overall, I think this season was way more enjoyable than the previous one. There's still a bunch of annoying stuff that I don't care about and that makes no sense, but what are you going to do? It's Elite after all. Anyways, that was all for today's video. Make sure to like and subscribe. Let me know what you think of Elite in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!